Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this brand new podcast with Fash. Very, very interesting podcast we've got coming up with Fash, the man himself. Thank you for joining me today on this podcast.
Pleasure.
Fash has a very, very sort of diverse background and experience from marketing to property investment and property development. From uni, he landed a job in advertising, working with some of the largest blue chip companies, such as MySpace, British Airways, ASOS, Boohoo, essentially managing their advertising, managing their marketing budgets. Now, whilst working for those large corporations, he then dipped into property investment / development with his partner. So he's done just under £2 million worth of GDV in Northwest London. He's now partnered up with quite a large development company, building out a development in Shenley, and he has incorporated his property group, FINA Group, which I'm sure Fash will sort of go through a little bit more detail towards the end of the podcast. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Fash, and let's get straight into it, and let's see share some golden nuggets. Fash, would you like to introduce?
Thank you, Collins. Yeah, thanks, Collins. Appreciate that. You make me sound better than I could. Yeah, generally, as you mentioned, 15 years ago, got straight into advertising after coming out of uni, actually studying business and marketing and management. Then it was very much at the early days of the internet. Well, let's say the very early days of the internet advertising. I don't want to make myself sound too old. But yeah, working with some of the big sites at the time, like you said, MySpace, some of the, big search engines, which I'm not sure how old your listeners are going to be. But, the likes of Lycos and Ask Jeeves and some of these guys who were very big at the time until Google came and sort of gobbled everybody up. Up until, now, the current day where we have, the huge giant companies like the Facebooks and the Googles really more advertising companies than anything else. As you may know, probably over 90% of the revenue just comes from advertising. Yeah. So I've seen the industry sort of transition into that. And during that process, a lot of the times, as you mentioned, myself and my wife were doing property refurbishments, mainly flats at the time, not really taking it seriously as a business, just on the side, I would say, very passively. But we started to build up a bit of experience around that, and I was surrounded by a few people who were in that industry. Okay. And only this year, I would say, probably, might be worth saying that it's probably a cause of the lockdown and COVID, and providing me with the opportunity to have additional time during the day to actually take it more seriously. Where I had a bit of advice from some friends to say, look, you've got the experience, you've done heavy refurbs in terms of detached homes and big extensions and back to brick developments, and you've done the flats, this is something that you could do. There's people with less experience already doing it. So that's when I started really looking into it, studying more, connecting with the right people, networking, and building up confidence really to be able to do it myself, connecting with developers, like you mentioned, who are already doing what I want to do, and trying to learn along that process while being invested in those deals at the same time. And, thank God it's going pretty well. Like I said, I think it's one of the pros or positives of the very difficult times that we've faced this year.
Yeah.
I'm generally a very positive person, so I always try to see the positives in every situation. And I'd say this stands out for me as a big win for the year.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Take me back to, just leaving university, and you've now did you do a marketing degree or?
So I did, my undergraduate degree was in business, like management with marketing. So it was a business management degree with a specialization in marketing. Oh. And it was one of those like 4-year degrees where you have to work it's like a sandwich course. So you have to work for a year. So I had to do like an internship. And that was when I was introduced to the world of digital advertising. Because at that time, when you're studying marketing, and I'm not sure if you've studied marketing before, but it's very traditional in the sense of like, the 4 Ps of marketing, and very like theory based and very basic stuff. There's hardly any digital at the time when I was in university. There's hardly any digital points covered.
Yeah.
And then sort of when I got into my internship, I sort of discovered the world of digital advertising, and I realized, this is kind of fun. Very young industries, working in an office where I guess the average age is about 28, 29.
Yeah.
But those are the people that got it. And at the time I was 20 something myself, early 20s. Did that for a few years, went back to university to finish the final year, and I actually continued working. So I was working in the evenings or working part-time for this additional company who wanted to keep me on, which was, I was very lucky to have that. And then when I came out of uni about a year later, I did another master's degree in business systems analysis. So I felt like I had the business acumen, and I felt like I had the commercial aspect of it. And I wanted to get a little bit more experience and understanding from a technical point of view.
Okay.
So I did a business systems analysis master's degree, which, to be honest with you, was very helpful in terms of, having a well-rounded idea around how business works, especially in a digital era that we're in now. But I would say that it was quite technical, and I don't think that I've used everything I learned in that master's degree. But then again, I'm not sure how many people do actually use everything they learn in their degrees later on in life. But yeah.
No, it's actually interesting because I actually started university, went there for literally a few weeks, and then pretty much abandoned my program just because at the time I just didn't quite understand and also work. I couldn't work out where this was going to lead me, and especially at the time when I was sort of in between what I wanted to do with life, etc. So I definitely sort of understand what you mean by that. But of course, for you, it worked out. You obviously knew what you wanted to do, and achieving this allowed you to go and work for a very good company, working with some of the biggest brands that most people are aware of. How was that, by the way? Sort of, what was your role and involvement in the company?
It was intimidating. Like initially, when you're young, and your manager at the time, who had an excellent manager when I started, in the industry, when they're saying, "Oh, we're going to meet MySpace," and at that time, MySpace really was the biggest social network. Everybody was using it, and it was massive. It's intimidating because in your mind, you don't have that experience to understand that, look, this is just another company. It's just normal people. Half of them don't know what they're doing, and they just turn up to work every day anyway. It's like it's a normal working atmosphere. I feel like once you overcome that intimidation, I think it's comfortable. But initially, I would say it was very intimidating because you just think these are really super serious people. Much older than me. They're going to think I'm just a kid that doesn't know anything. And I was probably quite quiet in some of those meetings, sort of sitting and observing. But then naturally, as you start to build up a little bit of confidence and you know what you're talking about, you realize that actually I do have some value to add. Like you realize that the people you're speaking to, they know a lot about a small topic, which is their business, right? So if you're speaking to, let's take a more current example. If you're speaking to someone at Google, you know that person knows a lot about Google.
Yeah.
But they don't know everything else outside of that. And, I was very lucky in the companies that I worked for in the sense that they weren't, these huge independent players. They were very agnostic in terms of who they worked with, the websites we used to work with, the brands that we used to work with. So it gives you a wider view on the industry. So if you're speaking to a big airline, for example, like we worked with Emirates. So if you're speaking to Emirates, you can say, hey, I know you know everything about Emirates, but let me give you a little bit of insight about what's going on in the airline industry. Let me tell you a little bit about what your competitors are up to. Let me show you how you're benchmarking against your vertical. And all of a sudden, you start showing your value and saying, hey, listen, I'm not here to tell you how to do your job. I'm just here to tell you how, what's going on in the industry and give you valuable information that you can maybe leverage to be able to sort of progress better. So it was intimidating, but overcoming it was just a part of the process, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's how it is in most sort of corporate structures,
for sure,
environments. So at that particular company, what specifically sort of were you doing on the day to day? What was your sort of role at the company?
So at the time when I started, very junior. So I was basically doing a lot of the work that other people didn't want to do, a lot of the data entry. And to be honest with you, even at that stage, I was still like, even though it was quite boring, like I knew I wanted to do well. I knew I really wanted to progress in that. So I was doing those boring jobs with as much passion as I could have. I was working on weekends. I was working on my holidays just to sort of prove a point, to say, oh, look how hardworking I am, and etc. And maybe that's why they kept me on at that point, because they were like, we're getting free labor out of this guy. But it worked out for me. And basically what I was doing, the role of the team I was in was basically going to websites and saying, hey, listen, I've got this advertiser, British Airways. They want to run a campaign to advertise a summer sale, right? Like a 50% discount on flights or something. And we want to put their ads on your website. And they would then turn around and say, okay, great. Like we get I don't know, 50 million views or users, let's say, on our website every month, I'm going to charge you £5,000 to advertise British Airways on my homepage, for example. And we would do it in that way, very, very transactional, very, very, I'd say broken if we look at the system now, in the sense that it was very rigid, like not much flexibility. That was when it started. And obviously now, that whole process, it still happens, but it's much more what we refer to as programmatic, in the sense that it's automated, decisions are made within under 100 milliseconds, and it's almost the space on the internet and the actual advertising is acted as a buyer and a seller within a marketplace, pretty much modeled off, financial exchange technology. So the way that stocks are traded, in the sense that there's a buyer and a seller, and then they execute a sale within milliseconds, it's done exactly the same now within digital advertising. And that's what if you've ever used Google advertising, if you've ever used Facebook or even Instagram advertising, that's exactly how it works. So when you put a price in, they take your price as a bid, and then they execute that bid when a user sees a website, and it's exactly how it works.
I see. Okay. Yeah. And it's essentially still the same today, or slightly different?
Yeah. So now, I mean, the only difference obviously is that it's faster, it's easier, it's much more technology driven, and less people need to be involved. So I don't need to pick up the phone to buy space on a website or an inventory on a website. I can just do it sitting behind my laptop, and I can probably execute 100 different ad campaigns, immediately across hundreds of thousands of different websites, including the biggest ones we know, just from one platform.
Yeah,
it's much easier now.
Okay, no, fair play. So that's pretty much what you spent. You spent roughly about a decade doing, just over a decade doing.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So at what point, did you now start to look at, investing, whether that be in property or other wealth, invest financial instruments? At what point in your career, how old were you when you were like, right, let me now look at perhaps maybe invest various different things?
The idea of investment, or the passion for investment, and as we've mentioned previously as well, it's not just property. So, my investments, my personal investments, let's say, they expand to, stocks and equity, angel investments, etc. as well. Yeah. It's just property is really where FINA Group is really focused right now. Okay. And I would say that passion probably, that came up way before I even started work. I was reading investment books and biographies of, like Warren Buffett and the usual suspects, obviously the very popular guys at the time, probably from when I was about 17 or 18. The only problem was that I was reading these books, and I don't know if you've read the Snowball by Warren Buffett. It's probably like a 700-page book, and it's very difficult to read. I was reading these books at about 17, and the problem was I wasn't understanding any of it. I'd read it, but I wouldn't find it too interesting, and I wouldn't really be able to relate to it, and I wouldn't really be able to know what to do with that information. So I used to read a lot of books at that time, and I really didn't start investing until 2008. So that's when obviously the credit crisis happened, and I was a little bit older at this point. Had a little bit of money saved up, and I thought, you know what, I've read loads of books on this stuff. I've done a lot of research, and there was another book that really, really motivated me called The Naked Trader. I don't know if you're The Naked Trader.
Naked Trader? No, I haven't.
Yeah, The Naked Trader. Yeah. It's very, very easy. Now that was the flip side. It was a very easy to read book, very much for the first time investors in stocks and equities, and that's what really got me into it. And I think maybe luck and good timing in 2008. I don't know if you're in the markets yourself, but pretty much you could just blindfold and pick a stock and it would go up. Like there wasn't much science behind it, unfortunately. But it proved valuable, and I felt, oh wow, I'm really good at this. But really, it was also the trend of the market, which was in my favor.
Yeah.
So that's when I really started getting into stocks and equities, and then that I never stopped really. That continued, and I continued to grow that. Not like huge amounts of money, but I think for me it was just diversifying, like where my income was coming from, and just sort of securing some money elsewhere. So then that grew, and at the same time I was getting married. I got married pretty young. So when me and my wife, I was 23. I was 23 when I got married.
Same age as me at the moment. So
yeah.
In 2008.
2000. No, I'm 34 now. So 2008, I would have been. Was that 12 years ago? So 22. So just before I got married. Right. Yeah. So just before, I was into, but I've known my wife for pretty much my whole life. But but yeah, so we got married at 23, and that's obviously when you get married and you start living together, things change. Your priorities change. So I slowed down on the investments, but at the same time, we bought the first flat together. My wife has probably got a much better eye than I do when it comes to property refurbs.
Yeah.
Like, we'd go to a viewing, for example, and she'd be selling the property to me instead of the agent selling the property. Like, we could do this, we could do that. And I'm like, look, I'm trying to play it cool. I'm trying to negotiate with this guy, right? Like, I'm trying to make it look like I'm not interested. But yeah, no, she's excellent at finding properties that have a lot of value to add, and she can see the end product just by walking into like a completely rundown property. So that really helps.
What does your wife do?
She's actually, by trade, she's a pharmacist. But she actually used to work in London, very close to where I used to work. And but now, obviously, we've got a young kid. We've got a 1-year-old, 1.5-year-old. So she's been at home for a little while. But yeah, she might. I mean, I've always said to her, like, I think she's got an incredible sort of eye for this kind of stuff. So hopefully, as FINA Group grows, she's going to be a super important part of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then with the investments, that sort of continued, and then we started doing the property, a small flat, 1-bed flat.
Hang on. Just before you go on, Nick, I'm sure some people are probably wondering. So you're 22, essentially. You've started a new role, roughly, at that time, as well, and you're looking at...
Yeah. I was working for about a couple of years, and she was working for a year at the time when we got married.
At the time, so 22, 23. So where did you find the money to buy, to also invest and also buy...
good question. Good question. I think, look, to be honest with you, I think we were very fortunate in the sense that at that time, mortgages weren't what they are now, right? It was much easier to get mortgages. Like, you could pretty much buy a house with 5% deposit. I'm pretty sure that's how we did it. You can get a 5% deposit. You can get interest-only mortgages much easier than you can now.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, we had some saving. And obviously, at the time, I remember exiting a lot of my stock holdings to obviously take that money and invest there, which was painful, to be honest with you, because this is the problem with stocks and equity, is the fact that the value is only there when you sell them, right? So it's not that there's no cash flow. Unless you take dividend investments, but generally speaking, you need to sell them. So I sold some shares. We had some savings. Obviously, family, like my parents chipped in a little bit. Her parents chipped in a little bit, and we tried to sort of support each other. But to be honest with you, it wasn't that difficult because of the mortgage situation. I mean, a 5% mortgage on an interest only. It's on a 1-bed flat in North London. It's really not that much nowadays. I have my brother-in-law who's looking to get his first property. And I mean, 20%, 25% deposits. It's very difficult, very difficult. So I mean, I totally appreciate that, and I'm sort of aware of how much more difficult it is now to get onto your first property. But then you have the Help to Buy schemes and a few other ways to help, but it's definitely not as easy as it used to be.
Cool. Yeah, that makes more sense now. So you've now bought the first flat. You've unwinded your stocks and shares positions. Where did you go from there now in terms of your investment?
So I mean, in terms of the investments, the stock and equity stuff continued. I didn't have as much money, obviously, to invest in stocks and equities, so I was very focused at that point on my job. So at that point, to be honest with you, if I look back, that's probably something that maybe I wouldn't say I regret, but I would have done differently now. In the sense that I slowed down on the investments because I was so focused on my job and my career, and I was like, I looked up to my brother quite a lot, who's 5 years older than me, and he's an investment banker. And I looked at his approach, which he's much more career minded in the sense of just do your job, climb up the ladder, you get promoted, you get these big bonuses, and eventually some of these investment bankers can earn a crazy amount of money. I thought that was the process, right? Like, you just do really well in your job and you keep moving up. And I sort of lost track of the investments, which I think if I had kept on with, I would have done very well. But the job worked out well. I progressed in my career, pay rises, bonuses, all that kind of stuff that I was trying to save and sort of reinvest on that kind of all those sort of strategies. And then we still actually had that initial flat, so we decided to move. We actually lived in that for a little while, moved out of that flat, kept it, and we had saved up again enough cash to basically go up and buy another flat in North London in Barnet.
Yeah.
Which that was the one that I was telling you about, where my wife was really selling it to me. Walked into this flat and I was like, I don't know what this place is. I like the area. Obviously, I knew the area very well. I lived in Barnet for quite some time. And at the same time, my wife was like, look, I think we could do this, we could do that, and turn this around. I was like, I don't know what you're doing. At this point, I got very limited experience. We've done a small flat, and even that was stressful and very expensive for me at the time, right, being 23. But we did it. We went ahead with it. She was, really, dedicated to that, and that was probably it was a very stressful period for me because it was a much more expensive flat. I was parting with a lot of money, like literally going, emptying all the accounts kind of thing, right?
What were the figures, if you don't mind
I
sharing?
think the property price was around 255 at the time. This is years ago though, right? So it's about more than 5 years ago. About 255 at the time, and the stamp duty. I specifically remember there was a stamp duty. The 0% stamp duty was up to 250k.
Yeah.
So this was 5k above, and every penny counts when you're 20. I guess I was 25, 26 at the time. I remember, and every penny counts. So I was trying to like find ways to save some money and try and get the price below the stamp duty. And we actually, I mean, I wouldn't advise this, and I don't know if you want to put it in your podcast, but we basically agreed like a cash settlement outside of the deal for the additional $5,000, so that we're not exposed to stamp duty. And this is years ago, so I'm just hoping no one comes after me. But it was, and as a young person doing this for a very first time, it was kind of scary. The guy was like, "Yeah, let's just meet in this like parking, and you give me like $5,000 cash." And I was like, "Oh, what if this guy just like beats me up and takes my cash?" So it was a little bit worrying in that sense. But things, happily everything went across. Again, lived in that property for a year or two. Refurbed everything out of that place. Like we went all out on that one. Really nice finish. We're talking like marble style tiles, really nice ensuite, brand new kitchen, brand new bathroom, brand new ensuite. Redoing it almost back to brick. Let's say it was a very old flat in a nice block. And then sold that a few years later for a pretty big profit. I'm not going to disclose how much, but it was probably one of our most profitable deals. And then obviously took that money again and leveraged that to buy a detached home, and then back to brick. And then that's where really I would say I gained the most experience. Was when you refurb a detached home, it's a whole nother level, right?
Yeah.
It's, I mean, in every sense, in terms of finance, in terms of stress, in terms of experience, like the builders, handling them. And we didn't have a project manager as such, so I was doing everything. Well, my wife and I were doing everything ourselves. So you learn a lot in that process, and you age a lot. I always joke around and say I had a full head of hair before that project, but it's all gone now. But it's not true. And then that refurb was, and in between that, actually, the reason we were sort of living and renting these places out is because my company turned around to me and said, "Look, we're looking to set up an office to cater to our Middle East and African clients. Do you want to help us do that?" So I'm in the middle of all this stuff, and sorry, this is before. No, this is just as we bought this detached house. I was like, "Yeah, I mean, where would the office be?" And they're like, "Oh, we were thinking of setting it up in Dubai." So I'm like, "I like Dubai, right? Who doesn't like Dubai?" And they were like, "Yeah, it's tax free. You can go to Dubai. You be there for a couple of years, set up the office, hire some people, and you can move back if you wish, or you can stay, whatever you want." So I was like, "This is a pretty, once in a lifetime opportunity." So I spoke to my wife, and we only had my son at the time, who was one. He's about 6 now, but this is about 5 years ago. So we said, if there's ever a time to do it, it's now. Got to Dubai, set up the office, had an incredible time for 3 years. And at the time we had to rent the property out, because we were like, "Okay, we won't have time to do it before we go, so let's rent the property out." And again, these are like some of the stresses that come with it, right? When you buy a property and then your plans don't go as you wish, and then you think, "Okay, I'm going to be creative and come up with a way not to lose money on this." So we were lucky enough to be able to rent this place out, and then went to Dubai, came back 3 years later. Obviously, that provided an opportunity for us to save some more cash, so it meant less borrowing. And then we got back, we literally started on day 2 of being back in London after 3 years. Wife got pregnant again, so we said, let's go back to London and have the baby there. And we started the works pretty much immediately after, and that was the most stressful one.
Is that property 3, this one?
Yeah. So this is a detached property now, and we went to sell it, and we actually ended up living in it. So so I'm not selling it at this point yet. I'm going to wait until I don't know. We'll see. I might not sell it at all, to be honest with you. Like I said, I think things worked out in a favorable way, which means that I may not need to sell it to move on to the next projects. And as you've seen, I've already got started with a few of those. So I always say things work out in a mysterious way. And sometimes you feel like, "I'm going to sell this and move on." And you meet people and they come up with ideas where you don't need to sell it, and the market works in your favor. I always say that I'm very, very lucky as well. So I would say luck has always been on my side, which I'm grateful for.
Yeah, that's a big move. So you've gone over to Dubai, done your bit there. Did you buy anything out in Dubai at all, or just
No,
rent?
that's a good question. That's a really good question. I have a lot of friends who are in real estate in Dubai, but I never did, to be honest with you. I always felt it was very, very volatile, and I'm not the biggest risk taker, right? So I'm generally quite calculated, and I've got a medium appetite for risk. But I feel like Dubai is just generally quite risky, and obviously, the returns obviously reflect that. You got very incredible returns potentially,
Yeah,
but for now, not yet. I mean, I think maybe long term, I wouldn't mind having one or two properties out there. There's a lot of great deals, as I'm sure you've seen. There's a lot of great financial opportunities in terms of like the way they structure the deals out there. Buy now and pay in 5 years' time, don't
yeah,
pay a penny. It's like it's crazy.
yeah,
Um, but for now, it's UK is still a priority for me. I really want to build the foundation out here, make sure I'm comfortable. Potentially, as we mentioned before, is like replace the cash flow so that if I don't need to work full time at my company, I'd rather focus all of my time on Fina Group. So we'll see how it goes. Yeah,
yeah.
but nothing in Dubai yet.
Okay, no worries at all. So you've come back now. The missus is
Yep,
pregnant.
had a baby
Had a baby.
whilst doing the property now. So she's pregnant whilst we're doing the house.
Yeah. What sort of works took place? So you bought it, so
Yeah,
detached property in North
yeah,
London. So
yeah.
what
So
did you do to it?
yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. If any of your listeners, if they pop on my Instagram, I've got some of the floor plans of what it was before and after, and
Yeah.
I'm uploading regularly quite a lot of photos of the process as well.
Yeah.
But basically, it was a double-story extension, back to brick on everything inside, moving rooms around, moving bathrooms, creating new en suites. We didn't go into the loft on this one; just didn't need to be honest with you. And complete refurb of the front, complete refurb of the driveway, complete refurb of the garden. So yeah, I mean, literally, it was the biggest project that we could have taken on at that stage. I'd say we probably kept about three walls, which was like left, right, and the front,
Yeah.
and we changed pretty much everything else on the inside. And if you see the floor plans on my Instagram, you'll see that it's we just removed so many walls, and that itself was like a huge barrier for us because we kept telling the architects and the engineers like no, we want fully open plan. Like bear in mind we just lived in Dubai for about 3 years, so we'd seen a lot of their developments and a lot of their designs, and it's pretty nice. Like they do things very nicely over there, very open plan, it's a nice living style. So we'd come with a few ideas of like what we want to do and what we want to change, and keeping that much space completely open plan and holding the whole house up wasn't an easy task to do, and it adds to the costs. But I think it worked out in the end.
Yeah, I think that's really important because you spent some time in Dubai. It does give you sort of various different ideas. I spent some time in Germany,
Nice.
and just seeing how people invest there, the lending structure is so interesting. So when you bring that back here, it's like you're bringing back
Totally. And it's also a mindset and cultural thing. Like I always said, when you live in Dubai, one thing that it's sort of like you can't help but notice is their mentality that anything is possible, right? Literally any. I mean, these guys built they built multiple islands, right? So it's like,
yeah,
I mean, in that sense, we sit here in the UK and we're like, oh, you should buy land because they're not making any more. Well, they are in Dubai, and they are in actually other countries are doing the same now. Okay, fair enough. The value goes down to a certain extent, but they really live and breathe this mentality that nothing is impossible. And I think that's probably the result you see of what Dubai is, what it's become over such a short period of time. Is probably the result of that mentality from top down, the leader all the way down.
Yeah. Okay, so you're pretty much doing a full on refurb on this property. Full open plan, probably a nightmare for your structural engineers and architects. They're probably like going back and forth, arguments.
Yeah, I mean, people were leaving the site, people were getting into arguments, the builder was like annoying people. It was at the time you think to yourself, like, you just get on with it. Like, I think every day had its own challenges, but you just sort of get on with it. You're like, well, what else can I do? I'm not going to leave a site half finished. I think the lucky part on that sense was that we were funding a lot of it ourselves. So you have less of that stress. So now when I'm looking at a lot of developments, one of the biggest issues, or the biggest thing on my mind is
Yeah.
the borrowing, the interest rate. How am I going to pay them back? I don't know. In terms of development finance, everything is paid in arrears, so you have to have that initial cash to pay your builder to get the work started, to get the materials, all that kind of stuff. Getting all of that done, and when you start doing the numbers, there's a lot of deals that come my way now where I'm sort of, and I love doing appraisals for deals, right? So I sit there on my Excel sheets and I've built a few good ones, plug a few numbers in, and you realize, oh, this doesn't make sense. But then if anyone else looks at that deal, they'll be like, oh, this house is an absolute bargain. And you're like, yes, if you're doing everything cash, which means you've got no borrowing costs, you've got no one else to pay, you've got no investors, whatever it is. Of course, it makes sense, right? But that's not how it's done. Like, majority of people are taking bridging loans or development loans, and these things come out with very high premiums, like potentially 1% a month interest. Now, if you're borrowing, you live in London yourself. If you're doing a development in London, you're not going to pick up a site for less than 300-400k, right? Like, and that's really low if we take that into consideration, right? Like, you hear about these crazy deals up north and Wales for like 60k, 70k, and you're like, it's not even a deposit in London, right?
Yeah.
So when you're looking at that, you realize, well, if I'm doing a property up for 500k, if I'm buying for 500k, spending 200k, and I'm borrowing 200k, like 1% a month on 200k can add up very, very quickly. And I think that's really where you sort of separate the experienced property investors, the smart ones, with the ones that are a bit lost. And I've been there myself, where at the beginning I was like, why would anyone go into this industry? Like, why would this doesn't make sense unless you have a lot of cash. And I think, that goes to, one of the questions that we discussed was, what are the myths of property investment or development? And I think that's probably one of the ones that I believed in, was you need to have tons of cash to start with. You don't have to. It definitely helps.
That's
no
what
doubt.
I was going to say. Yeah, I was going to say, because you've obviously gone, down a sort of slightly different route. All the, property gurus and all these people talk about, the property pyramid, so to speak. So you start off your vanilla buy-to-lets, get a few of those. That's your foundation. That's your base, and then you go into, if you want to go to HMOs or holiday lets or developments, flips, etc. You've obviously gone through. Which is what most people do in London. This is what I've realized. So they buy somewhere to live in, right? Then they either flip that or sell it on. Then they buy, another one to live in, and so forth and so forth. And then, if you look back, you've obviously built up some experience, incidentally, of, upsizing your property.
Totally.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've gone down the London property investor route, which is
it's we have to take. It's like anything. When you're setting up a business, you sort of got to really assess the area you're in, the arena you're in, the industry you're in, what other people around you are doing. And I think, London is a bit different. I think there's a lot of these strategies, and as you and your listeners will know, the buy, refurbish, rent sort of refinance strategy, BRRR, as they call it. It's extremely attractive when you sit there on a YouTube video hearing someone talk about it. And it is by far a foundational sort of financing method to really, let's say, creating a business more than just I own a property, to go and saying I take on 3 properties a year. To be able to do that, you really need to be able to refinance the properties, obviously. As you or the other people may know, London is not the easiest place to do that in its traditional form. And this is what I've learned over the last year of connecting with countless number of people with tons more experience than I do, and just asking questions to them, like, here is my difficulty, here's where I'm struggling, literally asking them, say, look, I've got this deal, I'm going to do it, but then once I do it, I've got no cash left. What do I do next? And then hearing them address that concern and learning from their mindset and how they look at things. In London, it's just a bit different. You can still do all of that. It's just, you need to be able to add more value because you're buying at a much higher price. In Liverpool or Manchester or even Wales, you're buying it at a much cheaper price. There's a lot of rundown properties that you can add a lot of value to, and right now those are very hot areas. So the revaluations are coming in decent. In London, you're already getting in, and as you've heard a lot of people say, you make money on the purchase, right? So whether you go to an auction in London, I don't know if you've been to any auctions whilst we still could. Now they're all online, but they're packed, right? It's not just 1 or 2 people. Like, you got hundreds and hundreds of people, and they're just the people that are coming in person, let alone all the international bidders, let alone all the people sitting at home doing it. You got so much competition. Let's say 50% of those are cash buyers. Again, more competition, right? I'd say 20% of the really good properties don't even end up in an auction or on the market, right? They're gone before you or I or any average investor ever hears of it, right? So there's a lot more competition in London because it's very desirable. There's a huge capital growth. It's a sexier investment area generally from an international point of view. A lot of internet, I work with some investors in Dubai, and London is by far the most attractive place for them to invest. You speak to people in other countries like India, they're a bit more open, right? They're a bit more open to say, oh, Liverpool sounds interesting. It doesn't make a difference because I'm in India, right? Like, it doesn't matter where the money's going. As long as it's making me a decent yield, I have a set target for return. As long as it meets that, I'm fine.
Yeah,
so I think that's why London you have to go through the work. You have to feel the pain to be able to actually grow in London, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned there was times where you were just like, should I carry on with it? It's quite a big jump. What was the purchase price of that detached or the end?
750, I think. Bought it for 750, valued at 1.2.
Yeah, so that's a really big jump, and that's quite decent margin in there.
Yeah.
So, in terms of to get into that deal, was that from the proceeds of the second flat, or?
Yeah, well, mixed. So is that and savings? I mean, it's all. I don't think you're ever able to refinance all of your money out every time. Like, I'm not saying it's not possible. It's definitely possible. It's just from my personal experience, I've never been able to do it fully. And I think you start kind of, when I speak to other investors in London, I feel like that's generally the way it is. Like, everybody accepts that you're going to leave a little bit in. Yeah. And the way you obviously calculate that is you work out your break-even point. So, and the break-even point is measured in time. So you'd say, I'm going to leave 20K into this. The rental yield is £1,000 a month. So I'm going to break even in 20 months, right? And generally, if people are happy to break even in under 2 years, what that really means is, if you've left £20,000 in a deal, the rental income is £1,000. That means you're going to be breaking even in 20 months, which means that in 20 months, you have no money left in that deal.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why a lot of people look at it from that point of view. And I think that's reasonable. Like, I mean, if I said to you, look, leave 20 grand, you basically own a property for 20 grand that's giving you cash flow. It's a very attractive offering, right? But anything more than that, if it stops you from going on to the next deal, it's a big question mark, right? If it's something where I need 150K to get into that next deal, and this is going to leave me with 20, 30K short. Some people are okay with that because they're like, I'm going to go to an investor, give him 8%, 9%, and, bridge that gap.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, no, I want to do everything alone. I work with, not work with, but like I have an unofficial mentor who I sort of go to for support at times. And that's exactly how he works. Like, he wants to do everything himself. He doesn't want to bring on any investors. He doesn't want to bring on anyone else's money, which I totally get. Less stress, no one knocking on your door if things go wrong. Not having to worry about someone chasing you saying, where's my money, when it's yours. If it goes well, it's you. If it goes bad, it's you. Like, it's much easier in that sense.
That's quite interesting just on that topic because, there's a lot of information out there. There's lots of programs and courses and all sorts of things you can you can deep dive into before you actually do anything. For yourself, I think 2 questions. This is sort of a split question, right?
Yeah.
Did you have any sort of knowledge or did you do any programs or read any books around property investing or property development or any mentors, family members, whatever it may be? Because no one comes from a property background. You either just
totally. Yeah.
So
you mean on the first few deals or like now?
I'd say first few deals and then
few deals. Yeah. So first few deals, none. Like, hadn't read a book, wasn't even interested. Right. I literally wasn't even that interested in property. My wife was probably more interested.
Yeah.
And we saw it as like, okay, we're going to buy a flat. We're probably going to live in it for a little while. Let's just make it look nice. Like, that was it. Right. That was literally all there was to it. I would say the support came probably from like our parents at the time. Again, 22, 23, we were buying this flat. Didn't know anything about it. And our parents had obviously done certain things in the past. Like, again, they weren't property investors or anything like that, but they'd done up a room or added an extension in the past at some point during their lifetime. So they had input. But I would say that's about it, really. But I think nowadays, even if you speed up now, obviously now it's very different. Tons of books, tons of webinars, tons of connecting with the right people. Never paid for a course. Nothing against courses. I think they can add a lot of value. But personally, I just felt like I could take the first few steps by myself without needing a course. And then what I really wanted to do was build up a collection of problems that I wanted to address and then take those to an expert or a mentor or a coach. to really zoom in and say, look, this is what I really need help with. If there's a course where it's like, oh, here's how you do letters direct to vendor, or here's how you do BRRR, or this is how you refinance, whatever. I feel like I'd know how to get around all of those, but I need to be clear on what my problems are so that I can request for someone's help to be able to address them. And happily pay for that too, rather than a generic course. So that's why I've never done a course. I've read a few good books, standard ones that most people have read, like what's the one, Property Magic by Simon Zucci. Just looking at my bookshelf, sorry. Complete Guide to Property Investment, Property Development by Lloyd Girardi. Like, these are great books, and once you read a couple of them, you realize that they get a little bit repetitive. Like, maybe not Lloyd Girardi's with development, because that's very focused on land development. But the Simon Zucci ones generally start to repeat themselves. You know, there's only a few strategies, and unless they change based on tax or capital gains or whatever it might be, they generally stay the same. And plus, I mean, nowadays you've got so much stuff on YouTube, literally hours and hours of free content, free teaching, free mentorship. Like, you know, I know that we discussed one of the questions was, you know, who my mentors are, and who's influenced me. And honestly, like, there's people who influence me who don't know what my name is and don't know I exist, right? Like, I call them unofficial mentors in the way that they mentor you, but they don't know they're mentoring you, right? Yeah. And, you know, whether that's, you know, your Grant Cardone, you've got Patrick Bet-David, you've got some of these huge, huge characters. Now, a lot of people don't agree with Grant Cardone's approach or someone else's approach. That's fine, but there's still learnings that you can take from literally everyone you meet and everyone you speak to, including yourself. Like, you know, I'll speak to you, and, you know, we've had a phone call in the past. I learned a lot from that phone call. You know, I like the way you approach things. I thought it made me think about certain things. It's literally anybody you speak to, you have something to learn from. So I'd say that that's probably why I haven't done courses yet. Now, I'm not saying I never will, but for now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I agree with that. I mean, you can definitely, especially, I think you've taken a lot from perhaps maybe your previous role as well, just being aware of things. And I do agree. I think depends on what you're doing, which strategy. What I do definitely believe in is, you know, surrounding yourself with the right people. I was 100%. Just lucky enough, you know, when I was working for my previous company, before I set this one up, is I was around, you know, people that were smashing it. My MD at the time, you know, he's done, you know, roughly around £500 million worth of property transactions, and worked with majority of the, you know, largest developers. And of course, the other MD was, he's turned over about £25 million worth of property development. So just by being around that on a daily basis, you just pick up things, you know, and even the things that they're not directly sharing with you or teaching you, you just see how they speak on the phone, how they operate, what they do, how they react to things. So I think it's a collection of different things, you know.
It's one of the biggest things. Yeah, I mean, nail on the head in that sense. I think the people you surround yourself with are super influential on what you do, and you can learn so much about them from every aspect. You know, I speak to people who do HMOs, even though that's not my strategy, but I find it interesting. It's good to know this thing. And the other day I was actually on a call where there's these two friends who got their own property development company together, and you know, they're absolutely smashing it. And one of the things that stood out for me was when they were questioned about their strategy, they were like, well, you know, anything that makes money, really, right? Like, you know, whether it's land development, whether it's a house to flat roof conversion, whether it's HMO, whether it's service accommodation, we'll do it all. Yeah. And that's not something you hear a lot of in property investment, because a lot of the advice is, you know, find your, golden area, and, you know, focus on one strategy and do that really well, which also is great advice. But these guys are going completely the other way. They say, well, you know, what's the difference, right? If we can figure it out, we can do it, and it makes money. Why would I turn down an opportunity? Yeah, kind of like that, to be honest with you. I thought that was pretty cool, and that's something that I aspire to. You know, at some point, being able to really take on any type of property investment or development.
Yeah. So, Fash, I mean, this detached house, is that completed now? That's complete. Yeah. So, what are you working on at the moment, and, you know, what's next?
Yeah. So, I mean, right now I'm eagerly hunting down, obviously, besides the Shenley development, which I'm actually going to see. I'm going on site in about a couple of hours. Nice. My main focus right now is I'm looking for large detached sites or land, and my aim is to develop flats, right? So I'm looking to, as you know, I like to hold the properties. To be honest with you, that's a change in strategy. Like, up until 4 or 5 months ago, I would say my strategy was build and sell, and just build up a massive cash pot. Whereas really, I think the longer term and I guess maybe a smarter strategy for me at this point is to build and hold.
Yeah.
So that's my strategy, and I'm looking for large sites, ideally detached homes in and around North London, the home counties around there, Hertfordshire, etc.,
Yeah.
to basically convert into flats, or land that has at least 1,500 to 2,000 square foot sites. Again, to build flats. So if anybody listening has any sites or any opportunities, feel free to reach out. Definitely hunting. But yeah, I mean, it's been tough. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, the market right now hasn't been easy, and I'm
Insane, isn't it?
speaking to a lot of people. It's yeah. I mean, when you're looking at like existing dwellings, you're competing with emotional buyers right now, right? People who want to live in those houses, and they're willing to pay above asking price because they're not thinking about the end profit or the end number, right? They're just thinking, I like this house, I like the garden, my kids will love it, it's got an office because that's what I want now. I'm going to bid 5% above asking price. For an investor, it's literally just based on numbers. So if the numbers just don't add up, it doesn't matter how good the property is, it's just not going to work. There's no point. You're not emotionally attached to it. You shouldn't be anyway. You shouldn't be emotionally attached to it. So I think that's what I've really struggled with. So I definitely made some mistakes in the last 9 months in terms of speed of execution.
Okay. What do you mean
so
by
I lost
that?
a couple. So obviously starting out, taking it more as a business, I felt like it's weird because before I never felt this pressure, but now that it's like a business as such, like you feel a little bit more pressure, and you want to make sure you're doing the right thing and you're not making any mistakes. And at the end of the day, you're doing this for profit. There was a couple of sites, one in August and one not too long ago. One was in November. So one was this month, one was in August.
Okay.
And one was a bungalow. Actually, both were bungalows. So one was a bungalow in, I can't remember exactly what area, but the one recently was in St. Albans. And excellent sites, lots of potential. And I knew they had potential, right? The one in August, I looked at it, then I was like, oh yeah, I think I can convert the bungalow into 2 floors, obviously add another floor, extend the back, do this, do that. But I was like, let me just check with my planner. Let me see what he thinks. And I went to him, sent him the site. He took a week to get back to me, which is generally average. Came back and said, "Yep, everything you want to do, you can do it. Like, go for it." Went in, and the guy was like, "Oh, it's we've accepted an offer on that within a week, right?" And I was like, "Oh, that's a bit frustrating." And then I spoke to, so I'm part of a mastermind, property mastermind, and we get together every week. And we sort of discuss what problems we're facing, what opportunities, etc. And I said to them, "Look, this is what happened." And one of the guys on there, who's really, really much more experienced than I am, he was like, why did you not put an offer in like immediately if you thought this had potential? And I was like, oh, I just wanted to make sure. He was like, make sure of what? Like, you could have pulled out, right? Like, it's not, if you put an offer in and it gets accepted, you're not bound to anything. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, what was I thinking, right? And within a week, that was gone. And I was literally kicking myself. And to be honest with you, I feel like I always say, I just said don't get emotionally attached, but I think that's the one that got away. I still track it online. I want to see if there's been planning submitted on it, like what's going on with it, what the person's doing with it.
Yeah.
And then the other one was recently again in St. Albans. The problem I've got is because I've got the day job, a lot of the time during the day I'm working on my career, on my job, right? So, and I need to be them. I have a team. I have to be there for them. I have to support them. So what that does is it takes away a lot of the time that I have during the day to work on the property stuff, which means that usually my kids go to sleep around 8. And from about 8:30 or 9, I'll sit on my laptop back again up until midnight. So about 4 hours of that. The problem is that, you'll find sites in the evening. Obviously, there's no estate agents working in the evening. Yeah. And then when you call them the next day, you're already late, right?
Yeah.
And this bungalow was basically listed on the 10th of November. And I called them a few days ago. So this is just over a week, right? Mm-hmm. So I hadn't seen this. I spotted it one evening on the 17th or 16th, called them the next morning, and the guy's like, yeah, sold. I was like, 7 days? How on earth have you sold this in 7 days? And he was like, yeah, it's sold. Like, this is the market right now, right? And it's like the speed of execution really is everything in this when it comes to investment. Like, you need to make a decision quickly. And yeah. I don't know if you follow Grant Cardone or if anyone else follows Grant
Cardone. Work it out later.
That's it, right? Make the decision. Like, by the time I've gone to my planner and got what do you think? And someone's already bought that moved in. Like, it's just, so the speed was a big learning experience for me this year. It was like, look, just move on it. Like, just go in and then fix it later. Like, figure it out later, right? If you think initial instinct is yes, this is a good deal, go for it, and then you'll figure it out.
Yeah, sure. No,
Yeah,
that's
that was big
really
money.
good, really good feedback.
Yeah.
Besides, of course, speed. What advice would you give someone who is, a similar position where you sort of started,
Yeah.
juggling a very good career whilst also getting into property, and also up against family who's perhaps maybe against, you know,
Mm.
concentrating on things outside of your career? What advice would you
Yeah.
give someone in that sort of position?
Uh, it's a great question, actually, because I think it's very common in terms of that the family sometimes don't get what you're trying to do or what your dreams and goals are.
Yeah,
I would say, look, the first advice I would say, definitely get started now. Like, don't delay. If anybody regrets anything, it's starting too late, right?
yeah,
So start right now, because history repeats itself, right? And I don't know if you saw my latest post. I put up where I was like, those houses going for the freehold house going for £675, right? That's all in. That was the
yeah,
price of the house. That was 100 years ago, right? So in 50 years, 60 years time, people are going to be looking back thinking, what? You only had to put down 100K. That's peanuts, right? That's
yeah,
nothing. So history repeats itself. So start now, save yourself a lot of headache. And with the family thing, I think it's literally when someone is up against you or maybe trying to direct you in a different direction, there's two aspects you need to really think about, right? What angle are they coming in at it, right? If this is an experienced property developer who's done it all and knows how it works and they're advising you against it, you
yeah,
should definitely listen to them, right? Like have a conversation and understand why they're trying to advise you against it, why it's bad, and what difficulties they've faced, which has put them off this industry. Because there are plenty, right? A lot of people hate this industry. Um, but at the same time, I would say that if it's a family member who doesn't have any experience, or maybe they bought a house and had a bad experience, you need to educate them and explain to them that you're not just going into this blind, right? You're connecting with the right people. You're going at it from a careful point of view. You're not going from no experience and jumping into land development, which is probably the highest barriers to entry, super complex, etc. Like you just said, you're starting slow. You're starting with your buy to let, a small flat, moving into a bigger flat, and then houses, etc. Like you're doing it in a gradual point of view, and maybe tell them that you've got a mentor or a coach that you've connected to who's supporting you in this process. And once they see how calculated you are in your approach, it shows your maturity, firstly, and secondly, you might be educating them in a sense. Say, look, it's not as scary as you think. I'm not taking the risk of putting my whole life savings on the line. Again, based on appetite of risk, like I wouldn't do that, but a lot of people might.
yeah,
I think it's the education process. Like I have the same. There's people in my family who just don't understand it, and there's elements where sometimes I need to educate them, and sometimes I just don't need to have the conversation because I'm like, look, you're not really impactful on my business or my goals. You're an important part of my family, but we just keep separate in that sense that we don't talk about it. Yeah. It's like, look, it's not
yeah,
unless I go to someone for advice or if I ask them for help. People will give their opinions, and honestly, I like my dad always gave this advice to me: is like if you ever feel like you're about to get into an argument with someone or someone shares an opinion you don't like,
yeah,
the best answer to come back to them and say you're probably right, and just leave it there.
yeah.
Do your own thing, but just say to them, you know what, you're probably right, but yeah, cool, thanks, and then move on. There's no point in engaging in those kind of things, but family can be helpful, as I mentioned, right? Like especially with us, leveraging their experience, the things that made sense was helpful for us, and then the rest was up to us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's really, really good feedback. And
Yeah,
yeah, as we sort of draw to an end, I think some key pointers there for people who are listening. Whether you're in employment, it's definitely possible.
definitely.
Whether you live in London, absolutely strategy. And I think I really like what you said because about the family thing. If you're approaching things with a little bit of science, strategy, you're very, very clued up. You've done your own research, and of course, you can recognize the information that's coming from your family members. They're just not in a qualified position to advise in a particular way. Then, absolutely, you have to have
Yeah,
the
of course.
selfishness, but just resilience to be like, okay, no, thank you for
Yeah,
all the
of course.
advice and everything that you've given me in the past and also in the future. But at this particular junction, I have to do what I need to do, seek
Yeah,
advice from the right people, etc.
totally.
And that's fantastic. And of course, you're going with Fina Group. I'm really excited to see what
Thank
unfolds.
you, man.
The different things
Appreciate that.
that are going on. Where can people find you? So social media.
Yeah, so I mean, it's funny because I always talk about I basically launched the whole company on social media
Yeah,
before anything else. I've leveraged that And I'd highly recommend that, by the way. It's been a huge, huge help for me. But yeah, Instagram is by far where I'm most active. I will be moving into LinkedIn. And this is, it's an interesting thing because, you mentioned about managing a property business as well as your day job. And obviously my LinkedIn is very much connected to my day job. So it's a little bit of a tricky situation because I don't know if you knew, but LinkedIn only allows you to have one profile.
Yeah.
So you can't have a business your day job profile and your property profile. So I'm going to be transitioning into LinkedIn because I feel like that's really the platform to focus on in terms of business and connecting with investors, etc. So that will be soon. But until then, if you just go onto Instagram, search for Fash Property, I'm probably the first person that pops up. So yeah, it's Fash, but the handle is fash.at.fina.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, no, thank you so much for coming.
Pleasure.
Today. I've taken away some golden nuggets as you were speaking, just taking down some notes. Brilliant. Like I said, I think this is the aim and goal behind this particular podcast. I want to speak with people who are smashing it in their sort of respective fields. You're someone who's doing very well in your advertising sort of employment, and also have smashed it in property and are going to take it to the next level. So really, really exciting.
Sure.
That's the
appreciate that
goal behind, and I hope everyone listening to this has found it of some serious value and some golden nuggets. And I think I mentioned this in the introduction, and I want this to be more of an interaction, way of delivering this content. So let us know what you want in terms of content and anything that needs to be improved, and of course fire across the questions to my Instagram. But that will be all. Thanks again for coming on.
Pleasure.
And
thank you for your time.
no worries at all. I'll see you all on the other side.
Take care, Collins.